Hello and greetings from Berlin. I'm Brooke and I thought I would share a little bit about my travel experiences so far during the pandemic and what I've done to stay safe and keep others safe, and what the borders have been like, what hostels have been like, etc. So just to orient everybody, I have a couple other videos where I briefly talk about what it's like, but I'm American, living in California, and so there's a lot of, I guess, fear-mongering about travel. My stance was that if I follow all the precautions necessary, I get tested when I have to, like for example to enter Croatia, that really it's probably safer abroad than it is back home. So I was really excited. I took time off work to travel and saved money and decided that I would give it a go. If I felt unsafe or if I felt like I was putting others at risk, I would go back home. So I left the US in mid-August. I flew out from New York, visiting my sister and her baby, and I was able to get a rapid COVID test in New York City, which was imperative to enter Croatia because in order to enter Croatia as an American, I had to present a negative COVID test that was no older than 48 hours. So getting in, being able to do that, and entering Croatia was really my ticket into being able to travel around Europe. So at the border, there were a few restrictions. I had to fill out a form. I had to have proof of my paid accommodation. They didn't ask for any of that, actually. They wanted to see my COVID test. I printed it out. They even made me go on my phone to show them where the test was taken. They wanted real proof that I guess I wasn't forging the result. So they let me in. I entered Croatia in Split. And after 2 weeks in Croatia, well, I guess I should back up. So this is mid-August in Croatia. You can imagine it's generally tourist central, especially places like Split and Dubrovnik. There were still tourists, certainly, but nothing like what it normally is. And I actually thought it was an amazing time to go and visit and to travel. The hostels, I had hostels that were fully booked. I also, at one point in Zadar, stayed at a hostel where I was the only one in the whole hostel. A bit weird, actually. And so I would say my recommendation for hostels is to really think about what you want and what you're comfortable with. Some hostels implement a system where they'll only book rooms to like 50% capacity. Some, their stance is COVID doesn't exist here. So I've been at many of those, and you really have to think about your own personal safety and what you're looking for, right? Sometimes if you have to get up early in the morning to catch a train, you might want to be the only one in your hostel. If you're in Krakow for a weekend, you might want to stay at a party hostel. So the recommendations I have for hostels to check, one is if the hostel is on booking.com, you can actually look and see, and it will often tell you like there's only 4 beds left in this room. And then if it's a quad room, you know that it's probably not a lot of people at that hostel. If it says, yeah, like 1 bed left and it's a 10-person dorm, then, it could be that they're booking at less capacity, but there's going to be people there. Another option is, you could do this on any booking site that has reviews, is to sort the reviews by date and try to go to hostels where people have reviewed it recently. People are going there. I had a really good experience at, let's see, I think it's Angelina's in Dubrovnik was a really nice hostel with lots of people. Wild Elephants in Bratislava was really nice. Greg and Tom's, or maybe it's Tom and Greg's, in Krakow was really good. 7 East in Berlin was pretty good, maybe East 7. Apparently I'm not good at remembering the names of the hostels. Hopefully I'm not missing any really good ones because there's certainly some great hostels out there. Castle Hostel 1004 in Lake Bled was really awesome. So Yeah, let's see, borders. It's so dependent on country, of course, and it's also dependent on your method of travel. So I took a bus from, let's see, from Zagreb to Bratislava. And keep in mind, in Croatia, it's part of the EU, but not part of the Schengen. And so Slovenia had some pretty strict border requirements. I had to show them proof that I was passing through, heading to Bratislava. Um, I should back up a second. Each country has their own set of criteria in terms of what countries are on their own, green, yellow, and red list, and it can change any day. So you really can only plan a day or two in advance. If you're going to travel now, you can't really book things ahead of time. You need to travel on a day by day basis and be super, super flexible. One example of that was I was planning on heading to Hungary, and luckily I looked at a map and I saw that Bratislava wasn't so far away, and I said, okay, I'll do a few days there, then head to Hungary. Well, the day I was planning on going, they closed the borders. So you really have to be flexible and know that things can change. Don't book anything that you can't get a refund on, unless you're willing to lose it. So you do have to be very careful about which countries you're in, and are those countries on the green list for your next country, because you do need, depending on the country, you need to spend either 10 or 14 days in green zones to be able to enter the next place without quarantine. So it sounds complicated. It is a bit complicated, but you just have to be opportunistic. And you really can't have your heart set on a single destination, because you might not be able to go. So with that being said, while I was in Croatia, it was actually put on the red list for many countries, although not every country. And so I was able to enter Slovakia pretty easily, actually. So I took a bus, I took a Flexbus, and I will say that the buses, they're pretty hard on the borders. They will check your passport. They will, pull everybody off the bus, wake you up if you're sleeping, even if it's the middle of the night. So keep that in mind. The buses are not, if you're coming with an American passport or anything other than a EU and a Schengen region country, the buses, they will check you, and you better make sure that you can prove where you've been. For example, let's see, actually, I'll just go chronologically. So I took a bus from Zagreb to Bratislava. In Slovenia, they made me show that I was going to Bratislava. They didn't want me in Slovenia because Croatia was on their red list. From Slovenia to Austria, again, they pulled everyone off the bus, but they checked the passport. They didn't care where I was coming from. They just wanted to make sure it was valid and not expired, so they let me pass. There was no border control between Austria and Slovenia. Let's see, and then from there I went to Austria. Again, no border patrol. I did a total of 2 weeks in Slovakia and Austria, which made me eligible. Those were both green countries for Slovenia, so that made me eligible to enter Slovenia. They were really hard at the border. I took a bus. They pulled me off. They questioned me for about a half hour, trying to make sure they knew, where I've been. I had to show proof that I had been in Slovakia and Austria for the last 14 days, but they did let me through. And let's see, then I was in Slovenia for a couple of weeks. From there, I went to Poland. Really, I took a train. At that point, I had learned that on the trains, they don't seem to check. And so if you're traveling with an American passport or a passport that's not EU, I would highly suggest, especially not an EU that's in a green country. For example, if you have a Spanish passport, you may also run into issues, but maybe not. But now at this point, I'm only doing trains if I can help it, just because they don't seem to check. So I had no checks going from Slovenia to Poland. And then from Poland to Germany, I had no checks on the train. So I think I would recommend trains if you book them a day or two in advance. They're a bit cheaper than if you book the day of, but it's also just a really pleasant way to travel. Night trains, I've been able to lay down on the seats, which has been nice, although they come, at least in Poland, they were checking my ticket every 2 hours, so don't expect to get good sleep if you take a night train. yeah, relating to COVID, I think every country has their own laws, and I would highly recommend being really respectful of those laws and following all precautions. If you're traveling in Europe, you'll notice that every place handles it very differently. In Krakow, clubs were open. On Hvar, clubs were open. But in some cases, a lot of things are still closed. But for the most part, every country I've been, people seem to be going on with their lives. They're taking public transit, they're going out to dinner, they're going to bars. Pretty much all the tourist attractions are open. In some cases, hostel kitchens are closed, which is actually kind of annoying and seems a bit unnecessary, but that's the world that we're living in. There is a website, I'll try to put it in the comments, where you can check and see if a tourist attraction is open. Like, for example, if you're going to Rome and all you want to do is go to the Colosseum, then you'll want to make sure it's open first before you go. It's been pretty helpful, although honestly everything has been open, so it hasn't been a problem. Let's see, in hostels, it's definitely a risky thing. There's no way to really avoid COVID. If you're staying in a shared accommodation, if you're sharing a kitchen, if you're sitting in a common area playing drinking games together. So if you're going to travel, you have to be willing to quarantine if needed. You have to know that you could get it, and you do need to take a personal responsibility to not spread it. And so you have to factor into your budget that you might need to get a hotel room for 2 weeks. I'm actually in this situation now. In Poland, I found out that a few people from the hostel I was in were diagnosed with COVID, or tested positive for COVID. And so there's no guarantee that I don't have it. So I actually got a test in Berlin, and I'm in a private room now awaiting my results. This is day 3 of the wait. It's unfortunate to have this happen in Berlin, which is more expensive than other parts of Europe, but it is what it is, and you don't really have an option. You can't just go about life as usual knowing that you might have it and potentially spreading it, because even if you're not at risk, it doesn't mean that the person next to you isn't, and you never know what kind of medical conditions people might have. I guess a good tip is every country handles testing differently and for different costs. For example, I arrived in Berlin, and because I had passed through a risk area, I had a train that connected through Vienna that was within 2 weeks of my arrival here. And so I went to the Berlin HBF station and I showed them my train ticket, and they gave me a test for free. So I think that's a good thing to know. They also did the throat swab, not the nasal, which this was my 3rd COVID test, and the throat swab was way better. So I think it's worthwhile looking where you're at to make sure you know where you can get tested. And if you are coming from a high-risk area, you might be eligible for free testing. Also keep in mind that entering some countries do require a COVID test, and oftentimes there's a time limit associated with it. So knowing where you can get a rapid test. In this case, I wish I could have got a rapid test, because they told me 1 to 3 days, and I'm on day 3, and I'm really hoping it comes either today or tomorrow. But it is expensive to put yourself in a hotel, and if I do have to quarantine, if I am positive, then I'll have to eat the cost and know that that was part of the deal when I set off to travel. I'm also a bit concerned to leave the Schengen and the EU. I think it'll be harder to travel once I leave, but I do plan on chasing some good weather, so I may head to Turkey, possibly to Egypt. Egypt actually is really trying to get tourists to come. They're trying to make it easier to get a COVID test on arrival, so that's pretty cool. And overall, honestly, travel's been really great. You have to take precautions. Some things are closed, like in Berlin, the clubs are closed, which they should be. But you're not always going to get the most vibrant city experience you're looking for. But if you want to go to some of the crowded spots, like Dubrovnik in August, for example, or some places in Berlin, it's really a great time. There's not a lot of tourists. You're able to sometimes be alone at really popular tourist destinations. And so I've been really enjoying myself, but I've had to teach myself to be more flexible, and I've had to know that there's no guarantees when you're traveling. So safe travels. If you are curious to follow my journey, I'm on Instagram. I'm at brook.meets.world. B-R-O, sorry, BROOKE dot MEETS dot WORLD. Spelling is not my strong suit. I'm actually, well, used to be an engineer before I quit and left work to travel. So feel free to drop any questions. I'm probably better at Instagram than YouTube, but be safe, enjoy life, and safe travels.